This meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee to order. While this meeting is being held in person, we are also offering the option for the public to participate through Zoom if preferred. Instructions on how to attend virtually are included in the City Council calendar item listed on the front page of missionks.org. The public is also invited to participate in the meeting. If you are participating through Zoom, please either add your comment in the chat feature and it will be read out loud, or note that you would like to speak and we will call on you shortly to make your comment verbally. Please remember your comments or questions are visible to everyone in the meeting. If you are part of our in-person group tonight, please raise your hand but stay seated and we will call on you to go through the lectern to make your comment. When you make your comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record. Also be conscientious of others trying to speak and speak slowly and clearly. This meeting will be recorded and posted on the city's website at missionks.org. Please contact the administration offices at 913-676-8350 with any questions or concerns. Ms. Volks, please call the roll.
Hayden Chomposi. Here. Boltinghouse.
Here.
Loudon. Here. Ryard. Here. Kring. Here. Schmid.
Here.
Josie.
Here.
Carpenter Davis.
Here.
Our first item of business tonight is public comment. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment now on an item not on our agenda later tonight? Please note public comments are limited to 3 minutes. I do not see any in person. Are there any online? Nope. Okay. We do not have any public presentations this evening. Therefore, we'll move into our action items. Our first action item this evening is the acceptance of the meeting minutes from Robin Folks.
Thank you. Draft minutes of the October 9th Finance and Administration Committee meeting are included for review and acceptance in your packet this evening.
Any issues or discussions or comments from the group? Doesn't look like it. I'll take a recommendation. Consent. Thank you. Our next action item this evening is for consideration of incentive requests for the 5665 Foxridge property from Laura Smith.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Council. I will just kind of kick off the introduction and sort of set the table. As you know, at your October meeting, you passed a resolution calling a public hearing on the TIF project redevelopment project plan for 5665 Foxridge, or the Silvercrest at Broadmoor TIF district. And that resolution set the public hearing for your November 20th meeting, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. So as we typically do, we now kind of work our way through the process of trying to review, evaluate the finances, both with our financial advisor and the developers team, their requests, our analysis of the project, and then any potential terms to be considered in a redevelopment agreement. So this evening, we'll invite Mr. Aaron Messmer with Block Realty up to give a presentation, kind of just to refresh everybody's memory about the project in terms of the physical components, layout on the site, what they envision for that project, and what their ask has been. Then we'll hear from Mr. Kimmel. You had a memo in the packet that sort of walked through his analysis. We have an additional handout when we get to that point that we'll review and look at that. If we have anybody from the public who wanted to comment on that, they would have an opportunity tonight, but they will also have an opportunity at the public hearing on November 20th. Then we would anticipate kind of committee discussion, additional questions. We do know, and the developer knows, that you're not going to be in a position, we are not going to ask you to take action on the various components on November 20th. So we will open that public hearing, conduct the public hearing, and then continue it to your December meeting so that we have an opportunity to incorporate any of the questions, comments, things that we hear this evening into those ongoing discussions. So with that, I would invite Mr. Messmer up to kind of walk us through the project again.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you, members of the committee, for your continued support of our project at Foxridge. So I think most of you were part of that approval process when we went forward in regards to the actual plan and zoning approval. But if you weren't, I think there are a couple new faces. We do have a 307 unit multifamily project at 56 Foxridge. We can go to the next slide, please. Just for context, the project sits between Broadmoor and Foxridge, just south of 56th. To our southeast is Broadmoor Park, and a little bit further south is Johnson Drive. Next slide, please. Just some of the existing site photos. Many of you are familiar with the former JCPenney call center that sits on the site today. That has sat empty for many years and continues to do so. Next slide, please. Same thing here. Next slide. And in its place, what we hope to do again is to replace that with a first-class multifamily community that has 307 units. For those of you who may be familiar with Block Real Estate Services and our work in town in Kansas City, we do all 4 major food groups in the commercial real estate sector. So that includes multifamily as well as office, industrial, and retail. I can tell you we are proud to still own every single multifamily unit that we have ever developed. So we have yet to sell any of those. We are long-term holders. We are long-term community partners. And what I will tell you is that that really informs the nature of our design. It informs the nature of our construction and how we operate those properties on a going forward basis. Next slide, please. This is the grand entrance. That would be located on the west side along Foxridge. Next slide. And then this would be a view as you start to come around the building from the northeast. One of the things you'll see as we traverse down the Broadmoor side of the street is that we work very closely with staff. There is an underground parking garage, so all of our parking spaces for our residents are covered and they're contained in a concrete podium. That garage also includes some of our other resident amenities, such as bikes, bike storage, but also like a bike fixing station, a bike washing station, as well as our pet washing stations. And so we tried to incorporate some of those along that Broadmoor section of roadway and create some of that transparency and visibility so that it wasn't just a big blank wall of masonry. You can see the garage entrances there where it looks like that white car is going in. Next slide, please. This just continues down the street and shows kind of those wider sidewalks and the improvements that we're making, and then some of the bike racks. We can come around a little bit more. What you'll also notice is that on the south end of the project, we have several units that are kind of walkout units. So you'll have these the folks that have patios and things like that, they can easily connect with and be right there in some of those amenity areas. Next slide, please. These are the on plans for the project. So you can see again, all of those parking spaces are contained underneath the garage. There are some guest spaces on the west side of the project at the surface level. So when you have folks, whether it's the Amazon truck or your friends come over, they can park there and come inside. And then you can see those amenities are kind of in that rainbow of colors along the east side of the building. You can also see the first story floor plan. The clubhouse is designed to be really almost see-through in that when you walk in the front door, we want our future residents to look at that amenity courtyard and go, holy cow, this is something that's really special. Next slide, please. You can also see that as we go up the buildings, floors 2, 3, and 4 are the full floor plan. And then we have the larger section, the taller section on the west side as it addresses Metcalf. So that's the building plan. I don't know that we have a whole lot else here. Yeah, so you can just kind of see the overall site plan again. One of the things that we do in all of our projects is have a fully amenitized courtyard. And so we'll have a resort style pool, cabanas, this walking track. A lot of times we're incorporating things like bocce and, you know, putting greens and whatever the latest, coolest thing is that the residents might want. Similarly, inside, we do full fitness center. So you can lose your gym membership if you want to, along with things like we're adding red light therapy now. And, you know, again, whatever our people tell us they want, we're trying to put those in our new projects. Again, as somebody who owns the projects long-term, we're trying to max out what those are for today because we know we're going to have to compete in the market 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And so we want to take it to the very, very, very top of where it can be in order to be competitive for that long-term. With that in mind, you know, we're continuing to work on the project and really try to position it to be in a spot where we can move it forward. As you guys are all aware, interest rates are much higher than they were. They've run up another 50 bips in the last month on the 10-year treasury, even though there's news that SOFR may be coming down. So all of these things factor into what we're doing, but it's a combination of rental rates, expenses, construction costs, interest rates, and exit cap rates. And that 10-year has a big to do with how you exit a project. The other thing that we're seeing today that is a very material concern to us is just the overall expense inflation that we've experienced over the last several years. Not only does that include things like payroll, maintenance and things like that. But insurance costs have gone from $250 a unit to over $600 a unit. With a couple hurricanes this year, we're not anticipating that to get any better. And so what we are constantly evaluating is what kind of rent can we get, and what kind of expenses are we going to end up with, and what does that leave us in terms of our ability to finance a project in a way that would provide reasonable coverage for debt service, as well as a reasonable return to our investors. Because we hold long-term and we're generally very conservative, we'll typically use a lower leverage profile. So we don't try to go out there and get 80 or 85 or 90% leverage. We're not trying to do that and then see if we can make it through. We're typically putting a substantial amount of our own cash in the deals as well as that of our investors. Our request tonight, and that we presented to the city and that we've been working through, is a 20-year TIF, starting at 95%, stepping to 90, 85, and 80% over each 5-year window. What we're really trying to do is get the project at a point where it's in the strike zone that we can go ahead and build. I can tell you that the last 2 projects that our firm has started on the multifamily side that weren't build-to-suit industrial, which we're still doing quite a bit of, were in November of 2021. One of those projects is in Olathe called the Clearing at 128. That project finished last September and leased up by this spring, which was fantastic. The other project is in Colorado, still under construction and expected to finish next year. So with those 2 projects, we were in position in the summer of 22 to begin 2 more projects, one at City Place at College and 69 and another in Omaha. We raised all the capital, and as the market started to turn, construction pricing was going up in a ridiculous percentage every month, as well as interest rates went up 450 basis points in 9 months. We actually refunded all of our investors' capital. To us, it's more important to do the right deals than to put them in a bad deal that we'd be down here a couple of years later and they'd be in a bad spot. So with that, what we're trying to do is just get the project into the strike zone that would allow us to move forward. We don't have, like I said, any construction starts in the last 3 years. I think that we are going to have a couple starting in 2025 in the spring. We've got several that are phase 2s to projects that we've done phase 1. So you get some additional economies of scale out of those. But I think the process for us would be to get the project here in a position where we would have the incentive in place, spend most of 2025 on construction documents, which can take about 6 months to finalize, and put ourselves in a position to finance it, hopefully for a 2026 start, although our ask is going to be to have time through 2027 in our agreement with the city. So with that, even under our current proposed TIF structure, and your consultant will speak to this as well, our return profile is in that 11% range, 11.3. I think in his analysis, you still want that to be a little bit higher. So we still have work to do even with that TIF in regards to seeing some interest rate reductions. We'd love to see SOFR come down a little bit. That's really more dependent on the federal funds rate, which is what you hear about when you talk about the federal funds changing the interest rates. So we're hoping to see some of that. We are seeing construction prices have really leveled off for about the past 9 to 10 months, which is great. We're not seeing those huge increases. And we're going to continue to work on our end to figure out a way to get this thing into the strike zone. We appreciate your help in doing that. We've enjoyed working with Laura and Bruce on the different numbers and different scenarios. We're going to continue that process with them. We know it's iterative. We know that we've got to meet the needs that you have as a city and that we have as a developer in order for a project to go, and would emphasize that any revenue generated by the project is still an increment of what it's producing today above. So with that, we're certainly happy to continue that work. I feel like there's not a huge issue with any of the documents or anything that we would be asked to do in the development agreement. I think in the past, we've reiterated our commitment to doing One Green Globe, which I think we talked about last time I was here, kind of giving the same talk. That's still in our plan as well. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have for us before staff and their team goes ahead.
I have a question for Laura. Do we have any background information on the plan when the plan initially went through that shows that the Sustainability Commission weighed in on any of its products, construction, landscaping, anything like that?
I'd have to go back and look, but did you go through the scorecard process with the Sustainability Commission?
Yes, we,
Yes.
we did, and I believe we received strong support from them.
So one of the things that's in the draft is there would be an exhibit. You may recall this from the Lanes Development Agreement. So there is an exhibit in the development agreement where they are specific about the sustainability improvements that they've committed to. And so when we get to that point, we would translate those things into that formal document. But yes, they've been in front of the Sustainability Commission.
I guess I'll try.
Thanks for your presentation. Is there any consideration to add affordable housing units to this project?
The affordable housing component that we've been talking about with staff has been in the form of a payment to the city's Affordable Housing Trust, as opposed to incorporating those into the units themselves.
Is it too early, Laura, to begin talking how much that payment would be and a percentage of an equivalent percentage of what we've traditionally seen from other developers pursuing incentives?
I think I'm not speaking out of turn to say in your pro forma, you've calculated that at $250,000. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, that's the proposal that we've made.
Ben?
Yeah, just in your view, kind of give me the pitch as to why the city would want to invest public money into this project, considering our land use goals and the objectives we put in place around sustainability and affordable housing. I know we have some of those elements sort of there on paper, but what's the whole picture? Why should we put public money in this project?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, our land use goals and yours are aligned, right? We proposed a plan, you guys liked the plan and approved that plan to be developed. So I think we're hand in hand there. With regards to the project itself, and I'll let Laura and Bruce get into it. If we're able to move the project forward, the project still does generate quite a bit of tax revenue for the city of Mission. It moves, if it's 307 units, you're talking about probably 450 people spending money in the city of Mission. You're adding to housing supply, which overall supply and demand metrics help to provide affordability in addition to whatever that payment might end up being. And I think what you're really going to get is a Class A plus long-term holder. This is not a fly-by-night. We're not building this thing out of cardboard, selling it to some California investor, moving on. We're going to be here. We're going to own this thing. And we're going to be hand in hand with the city in terms of its objectives of making it a great place to be. So I think what you'll see is we're going to attract a great resident base that's going to benefit the city of Mission in a number of ways that we haven't even begun to contemplate.
Okay, thanks for that. On our comprehensive land use plan, we've identified this parcel as high density mixed use, and we've heard reasons that mixed use has been a struggle for developers for several years now. But can you explain to us why we're not seeing a bigger mixed use component here that might go even further towards those future land use plans that we've identified?
Can we go back to the slide that identifies the site, please? And its location within the city. Just want to point out a couple of things.
Mhm.
The first is you're too far off Johnson to really have retail, right? It's not a viable retail site because you really want to be at Main and Main for retail. And that's where Johnson Drive comes in. It is the retail corridor for the city of Mission. So you don't have a presence here that would lend itself to putting in retail tenants. The second thing, can we go back to the slide for the location orientation? Office as a use is completely dead.
Mhm.
It's deader than dead, and you have a number of mostly vacant office buildings right in the same corridor. The one that is at the south end of this picture might even be a little further south than this, but the office building that Security Bank has their drive-through in, we bid on it a couple weeks ago, and we used to own it. We sold it a while back. It's going to trade for under $3 million. And you're talking about $30 a foot, maybe 35, like in a best case scenario. To build brand new office today, we built the City Place buildings for $340 a foot. Just to give you an idea of comparison. So you can literally buy it for 10% of what you could build it for today. That's just not going to put you in a place where the economics are going to work for office. So I think retail, you're by location. office, you're by economics, and obviously competitive set up and down Broadmoor there. And so I think that when we came in with a project that had the residential components, but also tried to dress up that street front along Broadmoor to at least give it that visual appeal, and to activate that street front, both with those glass openings and then the patio units that spill out onto the street. We felt like that was a great way to activate that site, and we were glad that the council agreed at that time.
Okay, and just my final question, and I don't know if you want to answer this or Bruce, you want to help answer this, but we've seen sort of in the memo, the sort of your rate of return analysis, our rate of return analysis, and maybe what it might look like if the city were to do some kind of counter proposal for that. But what, just give me a sense of, and I know that the answer is none at all, but give me a sense of the viability without any incentives at all. Are we talking losing your shirt?
We're
or
talking
just
four-
not enough return for investors?
Is it 4%, 5%? I mean, it's a range that you can probably get in a savings account today. So why take risk with construction and build a building and do all that brain damage when you can probably clip it in a coupon?
Yeah, appreciate that. Just
Yeah.
need to have that sort of as a benchmark for my thoughts, I think. For me, I think, the Green Globe is certainly, for me, that's a starting point for what we want to see. I think we tend to want to treat incentives on these projects as investing in something above and beyond sort of, a typical or normal development. I think multifamily, I know costs have gone up, but I think it's probably something that can be built and generate a pretty decent return in a lot of cases without public incentive. And for me, there's not a lot of extra building blocks adding up to, do we want to put, 90, 85, 80% of the tax increment towards this project for 20 years? And I think that'll certainly shake out more as we talk about, what is the magnitude of the payment if it's $250,000, and how does that exactly reflect, our ability to get what we want out of a multifamily project versus having the affordable units, built into the project. But I mean, it seems like it's sort of an almost there for me, but not fully justifying the full ask. I'd want to see just a step further on sort of all fronts. And I don't necessarily know that that's the right move for you all, but I think that's the reality of it from my seat. So.
Yeah, and I think to speak to your first point about whether a project would need it or not, we have 12 fully entitled sites. And I can tell you that if the economics lined up, I'd be building 12 fully entitled sites right now. The fact that we haven't started a project in 3 years tells you how difficult it's been to get those economics to line up. Not just from what you guys are doing, but from the debt and equity markets and everything else. So if it were viable, we'd be building a number of projects at one time. And we don't lack the capacity or the ability to do that. It simply doesn't line up today. But understand your point about making a public investment. I would also encourage every one of you, and we would be more than happy to host you at Apex or Galleria or any of our recent projects. What I think that you will see there when you go in isn't the same level of finishes when you walk in the unit. It's full height tile on the backsplash instead of a 4-inch strip of quartz. It's full height cabinets at 42 inches instead of 36. It's, full height tiles in the showers instead of a plastic tub surround, right? Those are the kind of things that you'll find in the units. When you go into the common spaces, again, our clubhouses might be 7, 10, in some cases, 12, 15,000 feet. So you're packing in a whole host of amenities and things like that, whereas others might be 3,500, 4,000 feet. I would encourage you to get a firsthand look at it. So stop by Gallery 115, stop by Apex at City Place, and check those projects out, or tell us you're coming and we will make sure you get a guided tour. And I think what you'll find is that even among newer projects or projects that are deemed to be Class A, this is a condo level finish. It's a step above. And that's part of the quality. If we're going to spend $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 more a unit than our competitors, obviously there's another component to having to get the numbers line up. But I think that you'll see that if you get there and touch the sticks and bricks.
Good. Yeah, thank you. David.
Could you remind me what the range is of rents, please?
Yeah, for units, it's going to be anywhere from $1,600 to $2,800 in our model, with the exception of the 10 like penthouse units, which are going to be in the, 4,000, 4,800 kind of deal. Those are sort of the exception, but the normal rents between ones and twos are going to be anywhere from $1,600 to $2,800.
1,600 would be a one bedroom or a studio?
That would be an executive is what we call them. So they actually do have their own bedroom and their own door. The living space is quite small. So you're thinking probably 550 square feet or something like that typically. I think these are actually a little bit larger than that. Our executive units here are 640 feet. But you think of it as a very efficient one bedroom.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So this is right next to Metcalf 635. So are you having noise abatement or anything like that to attract people that are going to pay that type of rent?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our projects at City Place are at 69 and College Boulevard. So the traffic and the noise coming from there is actually quite a bit higher than maybe just going by on Metcalf here. But, again, when you build masonry and that quality construction along with the higher quality windows, our window set costs $500,000 more than the next cheapest one. But it's because it's a better set of windows, right? To your point. And if you're going to pay that money to live there, you're going to want that experience.
Yeah. Let's do the mayor and then Lynn. Yep.
Yeah, so I had one question related to that luxury product, because
Yeah.
you seem to be indicating that that's driving up a lot of the costs. And I think that was reflected in our financial advisor's memo as well. So I understand why there's a benefit to you all in terms of, reputational benefit on your projects or increased rents, but sort of to piggyback on Ben's point as to why would that drive, a subsidy from the city? What do you see as the value to the city on a extra luxury project versus just a really nice apartment project?
Well, I think some of the benefit you're going to see is in 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, right? So if I come in and I build a normal deal and I sell it, right? And the next group, now they inherit the product. They don't maybe have the same relationship. They don't have maybe the same pride in their name or the deals that they do and how they operate. That's just going to be a little bit different. So the other thing that I can tell you is like when you build, I'm just going to use a very simple example. When you build your first floor out of masonry, all masonry, it doesn't get beat up like it would if you had a couple feet of something and stucco above that, right? So when you look at our renderings, we can go back to that if we would please. What you're going to see is that, the mower's not hitting it, residents aren't hitting it, your kids aren't coming up and scratching with it, like whatever the things might be. And so just something like that, it's going to stand the test of time a little bit longer. It's going to be a better product for your community for a longer period of time. I would also tell you that these units are units that say you own a home in Mission and you're ready to retire, you're tired of the stairs, whatever the thing might be. These are elevator served, interior corridors. And, if you're coming out of a 3-bedroom home, you can move into a 3-bedroom unit here. You can have a lock and leave lifestyle that you might want in retirement, but you're able to do that in the city of Mission and retire in place. So maybe that's another benefit. And then again, if it's 307 units, you got about 450 residents. And we just went through the same analysis on another project. The average taxes to that city's jurisdiction, just the city taxes, were $125,000 a year from those residents. And that was a 322 unit project. So very similar size in terms of the spend that they will do within the community that then flow back just to the city. Forget about the other taxing jurisdictions. So I think there's a number of benefits there. And frankly, there's millions of dollars on the table for your share of the increment of that TIF as well. And getting that clock started in 2026 or 2027 is going to be a whole lot better than getting that clock started in 2030 or 2032 or 2035 or whenever the market might line back up again. So there's a time value to your TIF payments and the share that you'll get of those taxes that won't be possible if it takes that much longer to build because we're waiting for it to come into that strike zone, like I said.
That does tie into another question I had on that time value piece, where you said you have currently, 12 entitlement sites that you haven't started on.
Yeah.
Are there incentives in connection with those projects and are they still sitting?
We have incentives with several. Some of those are different types of incentives. So 2 of those projects are historic tax credit projects, right? That are going to receive historic tax credits, for example, as a form of incentive. There are a number of those projects that do have incentives and there are a number that don't. It's a mixed bag, and it just kind of depends on where the projects are located and the economics of those. I can tell you the ones that we're going to build next year is going to be phase 2 at the clearing in Olathe, has incentives. I can tell you the project that we're also looking at building next year is Westwood Wyco. So for those of you who might be familiar, Woodside Club and Woodside Village North, we're going to build Woodside Village Wyco, and that has an incentive as well. In fact, I think your city attorney's worked on that in representing the Kansas City, Kansas. And then we're working on another project that's out of town that's similarly incentivized, and it's also a second phase to another project that we're doing. So those 3 projects have incentives. And then the other one that I think might go in 2025 is phase 2 of Galleria at 115th and Knoll. And that project has like a $35 million CID that's driven by the retail sales there. So if you've been to Whataburger, Freddy's, or Whataburger, Chick-fil-A, Andy's, Fidelity, that whole strip right there is feeding into not only the rock removal that we had to do there, but the construction of the thing that's really expensive in that deal is the structured parking. And it's same thing we have here. I mean, there's $13 million of structured parking in this project. So when we talk about what is this paying for, you're getting really the garage. That's what you're buying with your TIF dollars and the ability to park it underneath instead of having a bunch of surface parking out and around. And that's similar to how the CID at Overland Park works.
Okay, and related to those timelines, and staff might have already had this conversation as you're kicking off discussions on a development agreement. You know, we've been requiring of developers as of late to stick to a pretty tight timeline and to commit to a timeline or to have those incentives go away. And
I've seen the Mission
so-
Gateway movie.
yeah,
I was there when they
whether
swung
that
the
was
wrecking ball.
an expectation and something that your team, you know, was aware of. That, you know, we're not going to be looking, you know, even if people are open to incentives, I don't think there's going to be a strong appetite to have incentives on a project that then's going to sit for a long, you know,
What
period of
we've
time.
told Laura and Bruce is that we would be happy to agree to something where the deadline for construction start was the end of 27. So what that does, it allows us to put our construction documents together throughout 2025. It allows us to go get financing in the spring of 2026. And if for some reason there's a black swan event, you know, in that year, we have 1 year to reset. And that's pretty much it. So we're giving ourselves basically 12 months of leeway under that scenario.
Okay.
So that's what we would be willing to commit to. I feel like that's pretty fair, but also being realistic and honest with you, as opposed to setting a goal and just being back here to redo it again.
Thank you. So it sounds like you've got quite a few of these luxury apartment buildings throughout the area. What is your occupancy rate in those?
96%.
Okay, and that's been pretty consistent regardless of kind of where the economy's going?
No. In COVID, the buildings that we had that were in downtown Kansas City experienced both a reduction in occupancy and a reduction in rent. So one of the things that you'll find is if you build a new apartment project, you should be full, right? It's brand new, it's Class A, it's great deal, whatever the thing is. The question isn't whether you're going to fill those things up. The question is at what rate? Because you can always fill it up by just lowering the rent. And so we delivered a historic high-rise conversion at 12th and Grand called The Grand. And we did that project. I think the delivery was in 2018. And the rents, when COVID hit, were $1.97 and we were 97% occupied. And during COVID, when downtown vacated, so forth, our rents went down to $1.80 and our occupancy was in the upper 80s, for example. The rest of our projects tend to stay, I would say, very full. But again, it's less a function of whether you're going to stay full and more a function of what rent you're deriving at that point. It doesn't always do this, even though the pro forma that I have and that he has is always going to say that. But I will tell you that we have recovered at the Grand. We're back to mid-90s occupancy. And just as of like this quarter, we are starting to poke back up towards the same rents that we had in the spring of 2020. So we have now basically gotten back to even 4.5 years later.
So I'm happy to see new housing come to Mission, but I mean, I would imagine that this is out of range for a lot of Mission residents, which is both good and bad because it will bring in people from outside of the city. So I also wonder if the affordable housing component isn't something other than the dollar investment, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
Could we maybe talk about an investment in public art?
We have made investments in public art in other places. In fact, I think at the city of Olathe, we put in a really cool statue on our property at the clearing at 128, for example. And it's got a podium and we built it and we powered it and we lit it. It's actually kind of a cool property feature. So to the extent that you guys said, hey, that's something that's a priority for the city, we would be happy to do that there as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I think it's cool.
Yeah, I just have one other comment on the sustainability piece that I think I reiterated or I said before in one of the other meetings that we had with you that I'm really hoping to see more than one green globe. And I know there hasn't been any movement on that yet. And I would just, encourage your team to take another look at that, especially if you are going to be long-term holders. Because my understanding from other conversations we've had with green building groups and even other developers is if you're looking at it as a long-term investment, those sorts of measures are going to pay for themselves in time. And so, really taking another look at that, especially if the attainable housing is off the table.
Yeah, we've studied it pretty hard. The cost to go from 1 to 2 is about $2 million. It's a little over $2 million. I can tell you the numbers because we've looked at it really extensively. It just changes the numbers that we give him and then what we ask for.
We have any other questions? It does not look like it. Thank you for that presentation. Laura, can you remind me? So at the council meeting, we'll have the open public hearing for
so
this.
next, I think Mr. Kimmel will kind of step through his analysis and the memo. We have an additional handout so you can kind of see that split between developer revenues and city revenues based on a variety of different scenarios. And then any other questions that you might have. I don't think there's anybody here from the public that looks like they want to speak on this tonight. So typically we would take, at least give an opportunity for that, but they will have that opportunity in November and December at the public hearing itself.
Great.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Well, good evening. Bruce Kimmel with Ellers. It's good to be back with you in person. Last few times I've been here, it's been virtual. So I won't go through the whole memo in detail, but I did just want to hit a few key points. One thing that you might have noted is that we represented the developer's request as 90, 85, 80, 75. And as you probably noted, Mr. Mesmer noted that the request is for a higher percentage starting at 95, 90, 85, 80. So I will point out that the IRR numbers in our memo are still correct. Those don't change. And actually, they wouldn't change very much anyway because of the economics. And I can go into that in a little more detail. But I did just want to clarify that one point right off the bat. We have spent a fair amount of time going through their financials, and I'd be happy to answer questions about that. So looking at their development budget, both the hard cost estimates, the soft costs, looking at the financing plan, debt and equity, and then the operating pro forma with all of those inputs ranging from rents to other ancillary income to operating expenses to property taxes to TIF on property taxes to debt service on their loan and so forth. And as you saw in the memo, we had a few observations. One thing that we would note is that, and I think Block would represent this as well, these numbers are still just estimates at this point, right? And it's a very large project. They're looking at a project budget of over $100 million for this project. And so there's a lot of things that could move in different directions, some to the better, some to the worse. And it's relatively difficult at this time to look into our crystal ball and say, what will the hard costs be for these units, if they do start in 2026 or 27, for instance. But we did ask a little bit about why some of these costs were higher. And I think Mr. Mesmer noted, the level of amenities as well as the unit construction quality is really the main driver there. Similarly, their operating expenses are a little bit higher than what we would typically see, but they've noted that there really would be a higher level of amenities and staffing that go with that would be a big driver of their operating expenses. One thing I wanted to note, just in case you haven't heard this from me before, in order to calculate rates of return on an investment, you need to assume that the project sells at some point, whether you assume it's after 8 years of operations or 10 years or sometime future. If you don't do that, you never get to a full rate of return because selling a property is kind of a big payoff. Now, Block may never sell this property, or they might, but we, in our analysis, assumed a sale after 10 years of operations, which is pretty standard for this type of analysis. So we're not saying they will, it's just more in order to facilitate the type of analysis that we're doing here. I did want to point out that they have assumed in their numbers, and we did as well, the proposed IRB sales tax exemption, which with a project of this magnitude equals several $1 million. And so that is still a point of negotiation. That typically gets included in the mix because it has relatively little cost to the city. But that is something that we're assuming that it, would still need to actually be approved by the city council as part of a development agreement. And then what I want to do is just transition a little bit into the return on investment discussion, because what we've really found is obviously the developer wants as large of a TIF percentage as possible for as long as possible, because that will help them on their way to reaching an ROI target that allows them to feel good about moving forward with taking out the debt, getting the equity funding, and so forth. But in the grand scheme of things, because this is such a relatively large project, and because they are projecting that it would command considerable rents, the TIF dollars going into the pro forma itself don't make as much of a difference to the ROI as you might think. So you can adjust the percentages to some extent and the duration to some extent and still land in about the same place as it relates to a return on investment. Now, I don't want to be cavalier about this. At some point, they're going to say, we can't, go that low, or we need longer than what you're suggesting. And so that's part of a negotiation, right? But we did see in our analysis that you can manipulate numbers, look at different combinations of percentages and durations, and not see the needle move that much in terms of their rate of return. So what I'm meaning by all of this is that there is some room, I think, for city negotiation in good faith with the developer on the structure of the TIF, if you decide you want to give TIF for this project, and to blend that discussion of percentages and durations into a larger discussion of what might be other city priorities, whether it might be public art, as you just mentioned, or some other level of amenities, or the cash payment in lieu of affordable housing, attainable housing. So that's kind of the flexibility that I see as your financial advisor as it relates to TIF as part of a bigger negotiation and bigger picture. So I did run a few numbers. Again, you can see that with these different levels of TIF, you end up with substantially the same internal rate of return. And I just want to emphasize again, though, we do see a rationale for TIF with this project. If you see this as a project that makes sense for the city, adds value for the city, and if you feel good about the overall deal of this, we think, yes, it's not likely that they would proceed without any TIF assistance. It's really a question of, again, how does the TIF package fit into the overall mix so that you feel good about this investment for the city of Mission? And so with that, I think I want to move on to the handout, and I think you all have it. So what we've done here, I should note, first of all, this assumes 20 full years of TIF across most of these scenarios. And that's not necessarily a given. That's also a negotiating point, i.e. when you would start the clock on the TIF and how that would relate to the development schedule and the completion of the project. And so I don't want to say that's a given. That is something that is still subject to further discussion and negotiation. But since the developer did ask for 20 years of TIF, we decided to keep things apples to apples by looking at a few different scenarios or options to give you a sense of what kind of numbers we're looking at. And so in the first block, the first set of columns on the left-hand side, you can see the developer's request starting at 95% TIF, ratcheting down to 80% in the last 5 years of the 20-year span. And given the estimated value of the property, the current mill rates that are in effect, that would be TIF capturable, if you will, you can see that with these percentages, the pay-as-you-go revenues would total just about $16 million. And the residual TIF, i.e. the 5%, the 10%, the 15%, the 20%, would total about 2.4 million for a total of about $18.4 million.
And just a point of clarification.
Yeah.
So the pay-go revenues are those that go to the developer. The residual TIF is what would come to the city.
Right. And I should also note, thank you, Laura, the residual TIF are monies that would have to be used for TIF eligible purposes such as public infrastructure in and around that Silvercrest TIF district. And so they're not fully, fungible or fully general funds of the city. They would have to be used for TIF eligible public purposes. Then just to give you a point of reference, if you went with something closer to what you had negotiated for the lanes projects, starting at 90% and going down to 75%, you can see again, just on a future value basis and with no discounting, that the pay-as-you-go revenues to the developer would be about $15.1 million, about $3.3 million to the city for TIF eligible purposes. If you looked at somewhat larger decreases, still keeping that 20-year term, so 90%, 80%, 70%, 60%. Again, this isn't a recommendation at this point. This is really just for illustration. You can see that the mix would be about $13.6 million in pay-go reimbursement to the developer and about $4.8 million to the city. And then you may recall in my memo, I did look at a 15-year term, assuming that the TIF would just stop after 15 years and basically you would decertify both the project and the district and just go back to collecting normal taxes. And in that case, you can see that the TIF revenues would stay the same for the first 15 years to both the developer and the city. But then because of the city's relatively low mill rate in the overall mix of things, the city taxes in those last 5 years would be about $200,000 per year, which is just about half of what you would have in the previous scenario with a 60-40 split. So clearly we have a little more work to do in terms of looking at how you might use residual TIF versus general property taxes, and in striking the right balance that works for the city, that works for the developer, and that leads to the greatest benefit for the taxpayers' admission as well. And again, just coming full circle, even though we're showing 20 years here, know that we're having, we'll be having more discussion about, again, when does that TIF clock start relative to the construction timeline, and making sure that we end up with something that is reasonably aggressive in terms of making sure that the developer feels the incentive to move on the project, but also gives a reasonable amount of time for them to do their pre-development work. What questions do you have for me about either the memo, our analysis, the developer's numbers, or these TIF projections?
Great. Thank you for the presentation. I don't see any members of the public, but I did want to check, Justin, is there anybody? No. Okay. Any comments or questions from council then? Yeah, Debbie.
Yeah, anything for us to consider before the 20th? Or
So I don't think you will necessarily have any new information to consider on the 20th. So I think that's going to be the opportunity. Again, it's not a fully developed proposal, so the public won't have a specific opportunity to know exactly, which is why we're not asking you to take action on this on the 20th. So I think that we will work between now and the 20th to sort of work with the developers team and take what we've heard this evening and translate that into, other potential deal points that would be dropped into the development agreement. So we may be closer and have some additional information, but that I would say our goal would be to have sort of that fully developed recommendation to bring back to you at the December committee meeting and then for action at that meeting. So all of the relevant pieces, but the development agreement with those specific deal points are here and in this packet and will continue to be in the packet. That development agreement with those specific terms will be the last piece that would drop in there.
Leah?
I do like the idea of developing in that area because there is kind of a gap there with nothing going on. So to activate that area does excite me. I know in the past we talked about how this is going to affect traffic because that's kind of a funky little place there with Metcalf being the way that it is. Laura, has anything changed since our last discussions?
It hasn't, and I think we've had some conversations with the developers team. The traffic studies that were conducted in connection with the preliminary development plan, I believe, from their perspective, that's an area that, and I'm not trying to put word in Mr. Messmer's mouth, but I think these are the words he used. It was already broken and they didn't break it anymore, right? Based on the land use that would go. Did I get it close?
Exactly right.
Okay. Yeah.
If you think about it as a JCPenney call center, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry. It's approved for an office call center. So if you think about peak traffic times coming in and out, they all move at one time, usually in the morning and the evening. So I think our traffic study actually showed that, like you said, we weren't adding any additional burden to the system that is already broken.
So let me build on that. So I think part of why we have really looked at what this residual TIF is, we also there's not been any cost estimating in terms of what improvements should or could be made through that corridor. I think most of we've been in conversation with KDOT about potential modifications to the Metcalf Johnson Drive overpass. They are only going to be doing repairs at this point, and so they don't have a long-term plan or even really a short-term plan about that configuration. But I think having some of the residual TIF, which can only be spent on public infrastructure improvements in and around that district, allows us some flexibility of having some dollars available to potentially address those public infrastructure needs, which are still undefined at this time.
One more question, but it's for you, Laura. So it seems to me that getting cash for attainable housing is something that might be kind of new for us. Do we have any ideas of what we would do with that, how it would be used?
I think we've looked at the cash contribution, and again, we're still, some of these concepts and looking at it as in relationship to our tax abatement policy are relatively new. Each deal is a little bit different. In the Millhouse project, there was land acquisition that was a part of that as well. So I don't know that we have any really well-formed. I think there are, looking at, again, infrastructure improvements or how we might further those goals will be something that we'll have to just kind of bring into focus in the coming weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? No? So it sounds like we'll have the public hearing for this on the 20th during this month's council meeting, but the council will likely not take action on any items until our meeting in December.
So I think what makes sense is that we've already scheduled the public hearing. So under your public hearing section on the November 20th agenda, we will have that. We'll provide all of these supporting materials, but there will not be a corresponding action item under the Finance and Administration Committee agenda. So that will appear in December at the point at which, assuming you are ready to take action on it at that point.
Yeah.
Sorry, one more thing. So when we have the public meeting, could we have something that people could see what we would receive in terms of taxes without doing anything compared to what we would receive if we were to choose one of these options? I think that's really important for me and others to see.
Yes.
To help them to really understand the benefit of giving it.
Yes, we can certainly prepare what we're receiving in tax revenues from that property currently. Compared to, I think it would just probably be in addition to these various scenarios, or if we're able to eliminate a scenario or something, but we can certainly get that prepared for you. I know that's been an important part of the conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, just not to lose sight of the big picture. I think we should be prepared to continue discussing what do we want to buy with public incentive money? What are we getting for our investment? There's a whole lot of ways to look at this project. Several are good. Several I wish stacked up higher, but I'm not going to say that it's entirely good or bad. I think it goes a long way towards our land use goals, certainly. You know, it goes a good enough amount towards our land use goals that we were able to approve this as a land use entitlement and a planning entitlement. So that's great. I think there is probably, to give some credence to the development here, you know, sort of a first mover problem in this area. There's nothing over there. It would be nice to have some development over there. So that's a big plus for me. But you know, when we talked about tax abatement on other projects, some things that I think we can draw parallels across all of our public dollars type policies would be, I think, you know, we've been pretty interested in not just making the numbers make sense, but setting an expectation that a development brings a certain kind of quality to mission, whether it's sustainability, affordability, walkability. And so I'm not saying we have all those answers figured out, but I think, you know, let's keep in mind what do we want to buy with public dollars. And I think that goes beyond just whether or not it makes the project make sense on paper, which is a big part of it, but also what expectations does it set for development, you know, developers now and in the future that want to build on the limited amount of land that we have. So I'll be thinking a lot about that and hopefully come back with some more deep thoughts.
That'd be good.
Well, one of the key characteristics of a TIF project is that it's unique in nature. This is where I kind of draw back on some of the options for the city expending money toward another apartment complex because it's not unique. We have 5 projects pending right now. This one seems like the quality and everything is really there. There isn't anything there. That's true. But no one would approve a Walmart down at the Gateway either. You don't just put something there, and it's got to meet the TIF criteria. The reason, and I go back on this, the reason that the Gateway was sellable is it had things that were for the public good. How does this affect the Mission residents, and what do they get out of it? It had a movie theater, an upscale hotel. It had an aquarium. It had those things, and for those of us who were around back then, that was the push for a TIF project, in that it was unique in nature. It was not similar or anything like anybody had in Johnson County, quite honestly. And I think that's one of the things that we look at on TIF projects. Is it unique? Is it something we don't have? Is it something that's for the public good? And some of those answers are not real easy to come by with another apartment complex. And it's nothing against you at all. I'm just, for the record, that's one of the things that I think is a hard sell.
Well, and I think that goes, I would just interject, I think that ties directly to what Councilmember Chosy was just saying about, and I think the Gateway, you're absolutely right, but that almost 17-acre true mixed use development was very different than what we're looking at here. And so I think it goes to, I understand what you're saying in terms of what we've seen time and time again in the last several years as multifamily projects. But I think it ties back to some of the goals and objectives that you set when we updated the tax abatement policy. What do we want to invest public dollars in? And I think it goes back to, it may not be, it may still be a multifamily project, but how is it contributing to the other goals that you've established? Sustainability, affordability, walkability, all of those other things. And it really does. And I think you articulated it very well, Councilmember Chosy, in terms of from a land use perspective, if they were only looking for a zoning entitlement, which they were at the time that it came forward, you were, that met kind of the goals and objectives that you had. You take that conversation to the next level when you introduce the request for the public incentives. And so that's why we're here tonight, and we'll be here for the next couple of months.
And yeah, not to lose sight of, it is another multifamily housing and strictly multifamily housing project. But there's a reason that 600 and something square foot units are going to go for $1,600, and it's not just the developer wanting to get paid, right? It's inflation. There's not enough housing, right? You can look across the country right now and see cities that build plenty of housing, rents start to go down, which is incredible in this economy. We're not going to make that happen on our own in Mission, but I also don't feel very comfortable sitting by and having some gravel parking lots out there doing nothing for our taxes, nothing for people that need a place to live, and not being at least part of the solution. That doesn't mean that this is by any means what I think of as a perfect development, but again, this part of town, you could use some development. But I think also maybe I still want to just set the bar a little higher for some public incentive dollars. Yeah, that's it.
Don't mean to dominate here. So one of the things that we've been talking about in terms of our goals is increasing the density of population to help our downtown corridor to thrive. And I know you're not going to just be able to pull these numbers out of thin air, but one of the projects that has been completed for a while is the locale. Thank you. Have we noticed a difference in how Johnson Drive is doing, increases in people shopping and eating and moving around the city in the time that's been fully occupied?
Because we aren't able to cull out sort of specific sales tax data. I mean, what we can tell you is our sales tax revenues, although not by huge leaps and bounds, have grown incrementally and continue to grow incrementally. I think having basically the opening of the locale coincide with the start of the pandemic probably has not given us an opportunity to see accuracy. Anecdotally, I think we often hear how nice it is, or that people choose to live there because they're able to walk out the front door, go get a cup of coffee, shop, someplace along Johnson Drive. And I think that, you've heard Mr. Scott talk about it as we looked at the Mission Flats project, or, some of those others that are just in that next tier off of Johnson Drive, about what we hope that by increasing that density, maybe slowly over time, we bring some of the additional retail, right? That we want to see, and some things like that. So it's a little bit of a tricky puzzle, but I think it sounded like Mr. Messmer may have had some more specifics about kind of their estimates about the amount of sales tax revenue that's generated on a project of this size and scope. So we can kind of dive into that analysis with him and then look and see if we can't bring you something a little bit more than anecdotal information.
I appreciate that, because I am getting a little weary of, we are adding another 1,000 people to our population if and when all of these projects come through. And I know I have a really hard time these days turning left onto Johnson Drive. So I do think that we really do need to, really think about what we're doing moving forward and not get too carried away with, our density goals and making sure that, as Debbie has mentioned multiple times, that we are able to maintain traffic flow and police services and all of that kind of stuff with an additional, close to 1,000 people coming into a very small city. I'm beginning to worry about that a little now.
Any other comments or questions? Doesn't look like it. Okay, with no recommendation needed on that one, we will move to the next item. Due to guests joining us this evening, our discussion item related to the 2025 legislative priorities from Justin Carroll will be moved up on our agenda this evening and will be discussed now.
All right, good evening. So as mentioned, we were just kind of kicking this off as a discussion item with the legislative platform, that kind of process that we go through every year that outlines the priorities or areas of interest of concern that get communicated to the state legislature. So what you have tonight with the materials is we just made very brief minor edits to the red line from the one that was passed last go around. So the current 2024 platform. And just real briefly to call those two items out. So outside of updating like the dates and everything like that, we added a section in there just talking about zoning and allowing that to stay with local control over zoning. And then another one that we're seeing that kind of in the region that we're putting in there is right at the very end, just something in there about the World Cup, and just encouraging the state to fully fund the World Cup. So those were the very few moderate changes we made. And with that, kind of just kick it off for discussion. Then also with us is Stuart Little, who is our contract lobbyist with Little Government Solutions as well, to answer any specific questions or discussion items.
Great, thank you, Justin. Questions or comments from the committee? Yeah, Mayor.
Yeah,
Nope.
I was just gonna say on the zoning one, I wondered if we could beef up the language a little bit. I think, just saying removing oversight of this function would be a significant change that doesn't really even indicate that it would be bad, to remove local control other than further erosion of local control itself. So I think if we can make that a little more tangible, because I do anticipate, I think LGR's memos have indicated that will come back this year, and we've seen it over, the past few sessions, different versions. And I think, there have been topics in neighboring cities that have made that a hot button issue. So I think we can be a little more forceful on that one. That would be good.
Sure. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think especially as we start to look towards the World Cup and as development continues to press forward across Johnson County, I think transit and this comprehensive transportation plan and just in general, working with sort of the MARC and regional transportation planning efforts. I think transit is really becoming a big blind spot for the metro area and for Johnson County in particular. And something that we could reap a lot of benefit from really pushing harder on and getting more connectivity to other parts of the city. Frankly, I think the World Cup is going to push the city to its limits in terms of transportation. And we have, as a region, right, pretty much dropped the ball on that at this point. I think we're going to be chasing our tail to catch up on that one, if we can at all. But, Johnson County is adding density. Good, bad, or indifferent. And, there's only so many lane miles out there before you start bulldozing homes. And I don't think we are interested in doing that in general. I think it's asking for a lot right now to get KDOT to do much of anything to help our city. So in general, a little more, I think, forward thinking on things like, how does Shawnee Mission Parkway and Metcalf interact with the municipalities that are seeing more and more people, and how can we get people out of their cars and treating the planet better. I think it's certainly an uphill battle, but a lot of the stuff in our legislative priorities are. But I think we need that help from Topeka, and I would like to see that strengthened as well.
Any other comments? No? Thank you, Justin.
So what we will, I'm gonna add just a couple of pieces. No, you're fine. And I don't know if Stuart has anything he wants to add. I know we've had conversations with him about what he anticipates coming back and kind of being the areas of interest for us. A lot of those around tax policy and some of those kinds of things. And I think where we landed, at least in initial conversations, was to be a little bit more generic or open-ended in the positions that we take, so that we have the opportunity to respond via testimony or in other ways as specific legislation arises throughout the course of the session. And so typically we wanted to present the draft. This will come back to you all as an action item in December. So if you have an opportunity to spend a little bit more time in it or listen to things, and there are other changes you want to make, certainly you can send those to Justin and/or Stuart, and we'll look at getting those incorporated.
Great, thank you. Oh, yeah, more, Leah.
So one of my things is the homelessness situation here, and I see in here it says the city also encourages state and local collaborative conversations around homelessness and helping our unhoused population. Could we maybe make that a little strong as well, instead of conversations, maybe action? Under housing needs. On page 6.
Do you want, we can go back and look at that. Would you want to separate that out and have a section for homeless or unhoused as a separate item? We can look at that, maybe present some options
Yeah,
on that.
I would appreciate that.
Did I see another hand over here? No?
Brian, I
You
just
bet.
have one question. I was just wondering if Stuart could maybe speak a couple minutes just on, given the election results, if anything changes. I think we're seeing an increased super majority of one party given last night. Are you thinking sort of, will things stay the same as what you've thought in your recent legislative updates that you've provided?
Thank you. Stuart Little with Little Government Relations in Topeka. We're happy to continue to work with the city, and thank Laura and Justin for working with us. The question about election outcome kind of overlaps a bit with what Laura suggested in terms of some of the things that are going to come back. We're going to have a significant discussion about local authority, the things that we dealt with over the last couple of years, everything from prohibiting plastic bag bans to whether it's tax policy, whether it is, I'm trying to think of some of the other things that we did. There have been election issues. There have been, one of the most significant issues that has an impact broadly is the effort to pass the property tax exemption or tax rebates for government competition, wherein private entities are seeking redress if they feel like they have to compete with governmental entities. It used to be very broad. It's been narrowed down now to healthcare, childcare, restaurants. It is worth noting that the plastic bag ban and the government competition bill were both passed by the legislature, vetoed by the governor, and the veto was not overridden by 1-2 votes. So those kinds of things that we've gone through the process for years, the government competition's probably been 5 years, at least plastic bags, 5 years. That now fits into the realm of what was in the Kansas House, a 1-vote supermajority will now be a 4-vote supermajority. So the majority party picked up 3 additional seats. The minority party lost 3 seats. So that margin of being able to override governor's vetoes in the House is now 3-4 times as big as it was before. In the Senate, the margin for a supermajority was 2 votes in the majority party. They have picked up 2 more votes now by, so when they come back, there will be 31 in the majority, 9 in the minority, and you need 27 to override a veto. So very carefully going to note the things that there was a backstop, there was a veto and not votes to override. That's gone. So as of January, all of those things will be back because I'm not the only person that noted that. And all of that will be back and all of those things will be subject to debate and action. I'd be happy to answer any specific questions, but that's the most obvious thing from our issues here.
Any additional questions from the group? No, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, since that was a discussion item, I do not need a recommendation there. So let's get back to the action items. Our final action item tonight is for consideration of renewal of the interlocal agreement with Johnson County for IT network support in 2025 from Brian Scott.
Hey, really boring stuff. Since 2011, we have had an interlocal government agreement with Johnson County Department of Technology and Innovation, commonly known as DTI, and they provide network support for the city. So we have some servers upstairs that they support, both the police department as well as city hall operations, city hall departments. And then they provide support in all of our work productivity software, a Microsoft Office suite, internet, and then they provide IT security across the network and some other help desk type support items. So this cost has been steadily rising every year. We saw a dramatic increase last year of about 33%, and that was just because they had gone back, kind of done a reanalysis of their cost to provide support to all of the municipalities in Northeast Johnson County and the various agencies, the fire districts and the water districts and whatnot. So kind of realigning those costs. So that was a substantial increase last year. And then this year, we're seeing an increase of 11%, which is more in line with what we see in the past. So that takes it from 93,000 last year to a proposed cost for 2025 of $103,274.69. And that is, again, for both the city hall side as well as the police department. So that's it. Any questions?
Yeah, Leah, go ahead.
So going through Johnson County, is that significantly cheaper than doing a private firm to?
Yeah.
Okay, I
We've-
assumed so, but just wanted to make sure.
We've had this kind of ongoing discussion for the last few years. I've talked with private firms that offer that type of service. It was $100,000 3 or 4 years ago before COVID. I talked with them. And it was just strictly help desk. So they would be operating the network out of a cave somewhere, kind of offsite. And we would call them and they would do whatever they needed to do, but there was never anybody coming out here to help us with issues. And we bought, gosh, probably, I don't know, 80 some odd laptop computers this summer. And they came out here, unboxed them, ghosted those, went around to each desk, installed them, answered any questions. And they did it all as part of their fee. With the outside company, we'd have paid for that. And a lot of companies don't want to do that.
Yep.
Yeah, I just put it in perspective a little. This is basically $1,000 per device that we've got, you know, in the city and for an entire year of, like you say, unboxing it, supporting it, running the network, running the servers, keeping the website. I mean, this is, I think it's a bargain. So great.
Yeah.
Just one thing, Brian, halfway down, it says total for 2024, 103,000. I think that you meant a total for 2025.
Yes. Yep. And we'll chart their table. Good catch. Thank you.
And I recognize that the world of technology is very different, but when we transitioned away from, just in terms of, when we transitioned to Johnson County, we were paying $160,000 a year for that support. A lot of that driven by data hosting storage needs, which has, changed as things have evolved and with that, but we aren't even close to where we were at that point in time, in addition
We did
to,
have a private company at one time that we were paying $160,000
Yeah.
to. Yes.
Wow.
We did it
Yep.
internally at one point, at least.
Yeah.
we never have done it.
You want to do that, chief? Okay.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And that's, yeah, that was, I had a meeting a few weeks ago with DTI to talk about the agreement. And that was one of the questions that we considered hiring somebody to kind of provide some of our own internal network support. And my answer was, I can't find anybody. I can't find anybody that's got a general set of skills because everything's become so specialized. Desktop or a particular application or network security or whatever the case is. And to find anybody with a decent set of skills would be $100,000 a year in salary.
Yeah.
I mean, are they wanting out of this kind of thing or?
I think they're trying to find ways to kind of cut costs where they can, make it
Mhm.
reasonable,
Like
Provide us a little
I
bit-
say, I think we're getting a bargain. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
to put that on the record in bold or anything, but it's just
They,
true.
they maintain all the county systems and that's however many employees the
Mhm.
county has, 5,000 or so. And then they're maintaining all these kind of ancillary divisions of the county. So you got the sheriff's office and you got
Yeah.
the various cities up here in Northeast, like I said, the various districts and so forth. So they've got a full plate.
Any other questions? No? Can I get a
Move-
recommendation? Oh,
Move to
yeah.
consent.
Consent. All right. I think that's it for the action items. Ms. Smith, are there any department updates for us tonight?
Probably, but I'll hold them till we get to the end of CDC if that's okay, and I can
Got it.
collect my thoughts.
Yep. It is now 7:55 PM, and if there's no further discussion, that concludes the meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee. Again, this video will be made public on our website at missionks.org. Thank you.
All right, and it is now 7:55. I lost my voice this past weekend, so bear with me. I'd like to call this meeting of the Community Development Committee to order. While this meeting is being held in person, we are also offering the option for public to participate through Zoom if preferred. Instructions on how to attend virtually are included in the City Council calendar item listed on the front page of missionks.org. The public is also invited to participate in the meeting. If you are participating through Zoom, please either add your comment in the chat feature and it will be read out loud, or note that you would like to speak and we will call on you shortly to make your comment verbally. Please remember your comments or questions are visible to everyone in the meeting. If you are part of our in-person group tonight, please raise your hand but stay seated and we will call on you to go to the lectern to make your comment. When you make your comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record. Also, please be conscientious of others trying to speak and speak slowly and clearly. All public comments are limited to 3 minutes. This meeting will be recorded and posted on the city's website at missionks.org. Please contact the administration offices at 913-676-8350 with any questions or concerns. Ms. Foltz, please call the roll.
Hayden Chomposi. Here. Boltinghouse.
Here.
Loudon. Here. Ryard.
Here.
Ring. Here. Schmidt.
Here.
Josie.
Here.
Carpenter Davis.
Here. All right, our first item of business tonight is public comment. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment now on an item not on our agenda tonight? Please note the public comments are limited to 3 minutes. Seeing none, we'll move on to action items, Planning Commission action items. We don't have any items coming forward from the Planning Commission or public presentations. Therefore, we will move into our action items now. Our first action item this evening is for the acceptance of the meeting minutes from Robin Folks.
Thank you. Draft minutes of the October 9th Community Development Committee meeting are included for review and acceptance in your packet tonight.
Great. Thank you. Any comments, questions? Otherwise, Take a recommendation.
Consent.
Thank you. Our next action item this evening is for consideration of a contract with Orion Design and Planning for updates to the city zoning code from Brian Scott.
Okay, thank you. Been with the city now for 9 years, like close to 10. This has been one of my goals. Update the zoning codes, as more modern code with pictures and graphics and things that are relatable and common sense language, and we're not referring to discotheques and meat lockers and things like that. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's kind of fun to read through the zoning code
I was
sometimes.
gonna say, are you sure
Yeah.
sure we can't leave the discotheques?
Yeah, that may be a thing again someday, that may be a use someday again.
Downtown
Yeah.
discotheque district.
What goes around comes around, right? So really before, and I had this in the back of my mind, before we really began seriously thinking about updating the zoning code, we needed to first update our comprehensive land use code. And so we accomplished that last year, about this time we adopted it. And that really kind of set the guidelines, if you will, or sort of the stage for updating the zoning code, because that kind of gave us a lot of, a future land use map. We talk about mixed use development, high density, medium density, what exactly we'd like to see. And those are kind of general definitions. So it's kind of hard to visualize that in your head. What is mixed use and what is high density and low density, and how does that kind of fit into our existing environment today? And we've struggled as staff. We get developments like Mr. Mesmer's project, or Mission Beverly, or the Flats, or some of these other projects. And the zoning code will say it has to be 3 feet, or 3 stories, 45 feet or 3 stories. And the developers, I can't build that. I just can't make the numbers work. And we talked too about how we're going to set this building into the site as it is. So when we started drafting the request for proposals, we really kind of stepped back and said, how do we need to update our zoning codes? And we really need to take kind of a 2-phase approach. And the first phase is to examine all of these issues. So let's review our current set of codes and our various master plans we've developed over the years, and our West form-based code that we have, the overlay district, and the newly adopted comprehensive land use plan. What are all these documents kind of telling us? And then let's look for the pinch points that we have with our current zoning code. It's beyond just discotheques and meat lockers, but it's the application of the code as it is today. And then more importantly, the application of the code, given the vision that's laid out in the comp plan, the newly adopted comp plan. So that was kind of our approach. And then the second phase would be the actual drafting of the document. So that's how we drafted our request for proposals. So we did that back in June, July. We issued that in July. We gave a lot of time for everyone to submit proposals. Unfortunately, but not much to my surprise, we only got 3. Because it's just such kind of a unique field. There's just not a lot of people out there drafting codes all day long. So we did an internal review of those. There was one firm that just didn't really, we felt met the qualifications for what we were looking for. So we set that one aside. The other 2 were very good. One was a local attorney out of Lee Summit named Mark White. And he's got a firm, kind of a national firm. And he does this, he's been doing this for 30 years now. He's been doing it all over the country. And then the other firm was out of Montana, and that was Orion Design and Planning. So we invited the 2 of them to come in for interviews, and we had a selection committee. And it was Laura, myself, Carrie Cannell, our planner, Mike Lee, who's the chair of our planning commission, and Councilmember Chosi from the city council. And we visited with these folks and asked them lots of questions and engaged in conversation. And at the end of the day, we really kind of felt comfortable around Orion Design and Planning. I think kind of the collective thought amongst the committee was they get us, they kind of understand our community and some of the pain points we're dealing with. So that was really kind of they're both good firms, but that was really sort of the factor in deciding with Orion Design Planning. I knew it was going to be an expensive project. We had budgeted $100,000. I knew that wasn't going to be enough. And I was even shocked when I saw the proposals because they were both 300,000 plus. So phase one was $130,000. That's what Orion was proposing to us. And I went back and negotiated with them and got that down to 100,000, which is in our budget for 2025 or 2024, excuse me. And then I think we kind of came to an agreement that let's go through phase one. Let's see what we come up with in terms of recommendations for actually drafting the document. Then let's go back and negotiate a cost for phase two. And it may mean once we get finished with phase one and we get a better understanding of all that's going to be involved in drafting, it may not be as much as we thought it would be. So it might be a reduced cost. There might be an opportunity where Carrie and I could take on some of that work. And so we're not paying a consultant to do that. We might phase it out over a few years, kind of given what budget parameters we have at the time. So that was our thought process with that. Phase one, kind of going back to phase one, like I said, they're going to review all of our current documents, including the code and the comp plan. They're going to come out to the city and do a tour of the city. They're going to have some extensive engagement with the elected officials, the planning commission members, staff. They're going to do some engagement with community stakeholders. We're going to set up meetings with developers like Mr. Messmer, the folks that have really gone through the process in the last few years and understand it probably better than any of us. They're going to kind of go back and sort of study all that they've learned. And then they're going to sort of come up with some recommendations. And this is the important thing. They're going to test those recommendations. They're going to do what we call scenario testing. So they're going to, does it make sense to have a 3-story building, or can we go taller? What would that look like? And how would that sit in the site? If we come up with some ideas for the gateway site in terms of a community vision, like we talked about earlier this evening, what does that look like? How can we take that vision, incorporate it into a potential set of codes? So that's what they're going to do. And they're going to test that against the marketplace. Is that something that somebody would come in and be willing to develop? And then finally, they'll come up with an overall report back to us with all that information. And that'll really be kind of the guidelines, if you will, or sort of the stage for drafting of the zoning code itself, which would be phase two. So I think with that, I'll just shut up and answer any questions.
Yeah, what comments or questions do we have, Cheryl?
I think, this is getting ahead of myself, but sometimes we start these projects and they get rolling so fast and we, forget. In phase two, you recommended that, it would be a comprehensive and detailed plan according to consensus derived from discussions and comments from steering committees, advisory committees, and staff and public input. Were you thinking the planning commission then would be that steering committee, or were you thinking something different? Because when I was looking through all their pictures of community involvement and everything, I just get concerned if we don't think about that sooner than later, it kind of becomes a big burden. So just question what your thoughts were.
So what I'm envisioning is that we establish that community stakeholder group up front, that steering committee, if you will, and it'd be comprised of an equal number of planning commission members and city council members. Really, at the end of the day, those are the two bodies that are kind of the deciders in this process. So the planning commission is the one that's going to be quote unquote implementing the code, right? Because projects are going to come to them and they have to take the zoning code and apply it to the project, and they have to make a recommendation to you all as kind of the ultimate deciding body. So.
Well, I appreciate that, just because there's been general confusion, with Gateway and things, and that, the city owns that property. And I think that something like this could generate some questions, and I'd rather be ahead of that than behind that.
Yeah, there will be extensive engagement throughout with the community. We'll create a landing site on our webpage with information about the study, possibly some FAQs and maybe a survey tool or two to gather information and input, yeah. Mhm.
I would add one thing that we talked about internally and then with each of the consultant groups that we interviewed is we spend a tremendous amount of time updating the comprehensive plan, as Brian mentioned. We're not reopening the comprehensive plan. That is guiding the changes in the zoning code. And so we've talked extensively and will continue to talk with the developer that whether it's with focus groups or the steering committee, that we're going to be really clear on those parameters to keep that focus on the task at hand, if you will. That's what I was trying to get at.
Yep, Ben and then Debbie.
Yeah, so having had the chance to sit on these interviews, I'll put my full voice behind the recommendation of Orion. I was very impressed with their team and what they had to say. A word on sort of why and why pay this much for this project. You know, like Laura just said, we have the land use plan, the comprehensive plan that's already been essentially spoken, litigated, established. We're not going to reopen that, but you can take that and go a number of directions. You can have a vision for a land use plan on a parcel that says 45 feet, and then the developer is going to come back to you and say, well, we want 42 feet and we, can't do retail and blah, blah, blah. This is a firm that will be able to help us put together a zoning code that says, here's how you take the vision from the land use plan and make zones where you're not going to have your staff sitting around trying to, write up presentations for variances for the rest of their lives. And I feel like that's a lot of what happens right now. Correct me if I'm wrong, but, and the other part of it is we have just these, very lofty, form-based codes and overlay districts, and nobody wants to be the first mover on these things. It doesn't reflect the reality of the market or of the ability to construct. And I think Orion really was strong in their proposal and in their sort of team's experience in terms of this scenario testing, market testing kind of, we want to leave you with something that's going to work for you, going to be approachable for developers and not require tons of time on variances and staff reports and things that we don't want to get hung up on, and also be buildable in a variety of sort of economic scenarios. And they have demonstrated experience in cities similar to and different from ours, in sort of how to make sure that what you end up with is a development code that isn't just sort of rewriting it and putting it on the shelf, but it sort of works and lives, and I think brings us the ideal goal, right, is to bring us a lot closer to, you can look at the zoning map, look up the zoning regulations and say, yeah, we can find a way to build something on that in a variety of forms and under a variety of economic conditions. So I like their approach. I think it's a good one. I think it's worth investing in. And I think the wrong zoning code is going to leave you with as much, if not more, cost and staff time every year until you get the right zoning code. So,
Debbie, yeah.
I just want to thank you for safeguarding our money, Brian. Anytime you negotiate to help us, I totally appreciate that.
Brian. Hey, Trent.
I'm glad to hear Councilmember Chosie's comments about this. A lingering frustration I've had. It's not unique to here necessarily, is just, when we deviate, it dilutes our power and our authority as a respected entity for developers. And so if it requires us modifying things to align more with the market or thinking about that approach, I think that will make us more impactful long term. So I'm encouraged by what Councilmember Chosie says, and we'll be supporting this as well, and look forward that we're getting this off the ground. And sounds like it's something that will be living, breathing, and not just,
definitely. And yeah, just to be clear, we're not talking about things like Laura says, relitigating or reopening the comprehensive plan. But, when you can say something like it needs to be 45 feet versus 50 units per acre, a developer is going to be able to make things work a little bit better if we are more clever and more sort of future-proofed in how we implement the vision from the land use plan.
Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you, Brian.
And I let me just add,
Please.
because I think I've said this before. So part of the reason that we often have variances and deviations is because the zoning code doesn't align with the comprehensive plan. And this is the thing, I think you all understand that, but I want to be on the record to say, until such time as we get all the way through phase 2, there may still be deviations that come forward with projects. But know that we are working toward that end goal. And that's why. It's not that we're ignoring what the comprehensive plan says. It's just that in order to implement that vision, you have to consider variances and deviations.
I guess to that note, there may be some tweaking of the comprehensive land use plan too. As you go through this process, you might find that doesn't really work as well as we thought it did. I go back and tweak it a little bit. It's not gonna be an overhaul, not by any means, but there may be a little tweaking around the side. So I think we should be aware of that too.
That's good. All right. I'll take a recommendation then on this. Just like looking.
I don't know if anybody's nearly as interested in this as me, but I'd put it on the regular agenda. If nobody looks at me with a look of shock and fear about it, regular agenda.
That's awesome. Yep. Alrighty. And our final action item this evening is for consideration of a tree preservation and protection ordinance from Justin Carroll.
All right. If you will recall, we had a conversation back in July on this topic where I kind of just presented a host of various issues relating to the idea of a tree preservation and protection ordinance and just things that this body would like to think about and consider as we kind of move forward in this process before we even come forward with a draft to bring to you all to kind of advance that and finally get something on the books for tree preservation and protection. And so at the end of that meeting, we kind of landed on a few items, education being first and foremost, and just any changes we make, just making sure how we communicate those effectively. And then with the primary items that we kind of landed on were anything that was going to be in a draft ordinance, any sort of restrictions, preservations, protections, anything, replacements would be limited to commercial development or substantial residential development, which is already kind of defined in ordinance. And then the other part that I had mentioned was the nuisance provisions as it related to dead trees and tree limbs was a little gray. So while we were in there, we were going to clean that up and make that explicitly clear. And then as part of the process, as we were drafting the ordinance, you all instructed to make sure that we consulted with the Sustainability Commission and PRT as well. So after that meeting, we took that step as well and checked in with them and just kind of outlined the issues as well and what we were trying to accomplish, and they had the opportunity to weigh in. And so after all of that, we came up with a draft ordinance that also received kind of a comprehensive, thorough legal review, make sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And so that's kind of what's before you tonight. So the first changes kind of come to the nuisance ordinance, which is in section 220, very minor. We just moved that in the tree stuff into section 220 and just call that out now. Just any dead tree limbs or trees are a nuisance that can be enforced. And then obviously the meat and potatoes of tonight is the changes that we made to section 240 with the tree board, trees and shrubs section. I apologize. I know there's not actually a red line for section 240 because to be quite honest with you, we did a pretty comprehensive cleanup of this section. As noted on the write-up on page 2, we updated the tree list, all the permissible trees, the prohibited trees, and a lot of technical cleanup just regarding the general provisions for tree care and planting. I mean, there's some pretty boring stuff in there, but like site triangles, utility easements, all of that stuff, it just kind of made it a little overwhelming. So that's why there's no red line when it comes to that. But I will say everything in section 240 is really, it's the technical cleanup stuff until you get to 240, 450, which is Article 4, which is the tree protection and tree removal. And then that's basically all of the new stuff that we've added in there. And so I'll kind of just dive into that portion of it. So with section 240, the big change is now we're requiring this tree protection and removal plan prior to issuing a permit for commercial or substantial residential projects. That type of plan will have to show kind of all the existing trees on a property and then indicate like if they want to remove them or not. It should also note on there, they'll have to put the fencing on there. And as part of the new language we added, so I won't go into the super specifics, but based on the size of the tree and the location, then it requires the fencing accordingly. And then it just the guidelines state like how far out the fencing needs to be based on the tree, which is kind of just standard provisions that came from Mark's kind of draft model tree ordinance is where we got those from. And then the last thing, there are some exceptions in there, which I think kind of made sense that were in the draft ordinance in terms of trees that are allowed to be removed, like if they're dead already on the property, if you can't design around a tree, like if it's impacting the building site or the footprint or something, and there's just nothing that can be done, like those are allowed to be removed. There's a few other exceptions in there, but not trying to kind of be too willy-nilly with that, but some reasonable accommodations on a site to allow for them to be removed outright. And then we get into the last portion with all of this which is the tree replacement. And so what you see in the write-up and in the ordinance itself, there's the table 1, it's called the mitigation for removal table. So this came straight from the draft, from the model ordinance. I will note, this is a little bit of a newer concept that we didn't discuss back in June. And what I mean by that is it does outline, like if you remove a tree, this is the type of tree that needs to go back in. But this table also includes like a fee in lieu option, which is if they don't want to but like if a developer didn't want to replace a tree or for some reason, this would allow for a cash contribution that could go like into the city's tree fund to replant trees. So that is probably the only item we didn't discuss previously that is a little bit of a newer concept that is in the draft ordinance in front of you tonight. And then we cleaned up to it, just notes what the last changes in 240 talk about the fines, the actual punishment of any violations of that. So it's the not more than $1,000 or 6 months jail time, which is just kind of the standard. And then lastly, since we just got done talking about this, I would just like to note that with this when this ordinance gets adopted, that actually accomplishes goal 4B to preserve and increase Mission's tree canopy that's in the comprehensive plan. So it's actually officially checking a box off in the plan. So, all right, I know that's a lot. I know there's a lot in here as well, so I'm happy to stand for questions.
Yeah, but comments or questions? We have Debbie and then Sally.
Who would enforce the penalty, the police or public works?
It's an actual fine. Well, the police would write a ticket and then it would,
Code enforcement.
or
right?
sorry,
Yeah.
yes.
Code enforcement would write the ticket.
Yeah. But the actual punishment with it would go to the court for whatever they would actually levy on it.
Great, Sally.
Yeah, Justin, I know we've talked about a few things on this, but I did forget about one thing that I just wanted to raise, and it might be what's in the existing language, but in 240.270, which ties into utilities, especially sections, I guess it's both sections A and B, they use the language of no trees may be planted or allowed to grow under or within 10 feet of any utility wire. So I know like for my entire street, that would mean ripping out all trees except for street trees, basically, because all backyard trees are going to be, quote, allowed to be growing within 10 feet of all of the electrical lines. So I just don't know if that section makes sense for Mission. I think it's probably smart with respect to new plantings, but you'd be tearing out of a lot of established trees if you weren't allowing them to grow in that space.
Nope, good catch. We'll take a look at that. Maybe you didn't get everything cleaned up as well as we thought.
Yeah, not to be too harsh about it, but the utility that holds the easement can enforce their easement as they see fit.
Sure, but not making it part of,
Yeah,
our
absolutely. I mean, I agree with you, is my
municipal
point.
code
Yeah.
piece. Yeah, I mean, that's
that-
probably gonna be within the easement if they say it's a problem, but if they aren't saying it's a problem, we probably shouldn't just
Yeah.
proactively say it's a problem.
Anybody else? Yep, Ben.
Oh, I had something. So for big trees, 12 to 24 inches, $400 per caliper inch for fee in lieu. That seems like very cheap. I think.
I thought that too.
Yeah.
That was a little.
Yeah, and again, that did come straight from the draft ordinance. I will note, in a previous life, another jurisdiction doing similar work like this. I mean, some of it's just kind of throwing it against the wall and seeing where you kind of want to land on it. I mean, it's certainly the discretion of the body if
Yeah.
to change those amounts. So I just kind of went with the standard from theirs, but
Yeah, I would just, looking at that, if I'm a developer that doesn't care, I'm just gonna buy the trees and cut them down. That's, I don't know, tree law is notorious in law school, so always, a big tree is like 6-figure settlements, right? Like, people value trees, and I think we should too, is my point.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about both like actual replacement costs and then just with our sustainability goals, putting a little more bite in that because those large trees are gonna have a big impact on those goals.
yeah, we can try and, if you want, we can look at around to try and increase those amounts. If I can find some,
Yeah, I don't know,
Numbers.
I'm not gonna be able to right size the fee structure
Yeah.
right here, right now, but
yeah,
certainly if I was a less than good actor, I would not hesitate to pay $5,000 and cut down a huge tree that I otherwise shouldn't. So.
we'll take a look. I know some of these have just recently gone on the books from some of our neighbors and stuff. So
Yeah.
I'll go take a look and see if there's something that makes sense. We can include that and call that out in 2 weeks.
Yeah, and certainly it's possible I'm misunderstanding the true point of the model ordinance here. So my word is not law, but it seems cheap.
I think Debbie had her hand and then we're gonna leave.
What is it about a Bradford pear that we can't allow anymore?
Oh, boy. Oh, no.
Yeah, I didn't even have to say anything.
That's the stinky tree.
I think it was that like last year or two. I mean, like the state agencies have come out. Yeah, statewide, they're really
They
weak.
grow so fast that they just fall over and they also smell really bad.
They smell bad?
Oh, they smell terrible. Yeah.
That's so funny.
It's kind of interesting, but there's actually trees growing out in, like meadowlands, open lands. There's more and more trees taking up meadowlands. So it's kind of a reverse what you think of an urban area where you want more trees, but in rural areas where you want open area, and that's what Bradford pears are doing.
Yeah, Kansas prairie has
They're
been
kinda
choked by
crazy.
invasive woody species, so.
Leah, I think it's to say I could keep talking about how they smell, but.
And obviously this wouldn't end up in statute, but just like training wise for those who are enforcing this, again, I'd like to bring up the fact that when it's appropriate that, information be offered to residents that they can get help with removing said trees
costs,
and,
yep.
and understanding who to call and how to go about it, just so that, we don't have people who are like, I don't have the money to do that and I don't even know where to start and,
We've had a couple of cases like that this summer. We've referred folks to our Mission Possible program to get help with that cost.
All right, any final questions or comments? Thanks so much
All
for
right,
your work
thank
on
you.
this. All right, so that concludes action items. Oh yeah, sorry, recommendation. Let's
If we think there's maybe some changes coming back, let's go
Yeah.
regular.
agree. All right, thank you for that reminder. So we have one discussion item this evening, which is a review of the city's 2024-2025 snow plan from Brent Morton.
Thank you very much. This is our 2024-2025 snow plan. A copy of this was in the packet. I'll just kind of hit the highlights. Once the months hit, our snow crews are on call 24/7. We run 2 shifts, 7 a.m., 7 p.m., 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. So once we know the weather's coming in, we usually get our guys there a couple hours ahead of time to make sure trucks are ready, salt's in the trucks, and we're ready to go once the snow hits the ground. Pre-treating if we know we need to, ice or, bad weather's coming in, we'll pre-treat the hills and the intersections and stuff like that. We have at it this year, we're trying it out salt brine, so we have 1 truck set up for that. So you will see that out ahead of storm coming, sometimes up to 24 hours before we know it's coming. we're just kind of testing the waters with it this year, doing hills, major thoroughfares, and just problem areas. And, you know, we'll expand on that once we see how it kind of works. Work well with the police. If it's kind of a questionable storm, we have the guys on standby, but Dan's officers are always calling us if the roads are getting bad. Got the scout cam, so usually we have people here and we don't have those kind of issues where we get caught off guard. The routes, landlocked, so not a lot changes year to year. Haven't had any new roads, so we're in good shape there. Johnson Drive is basically a divider, north and south. So we have two of our bigger trucks running the main drags, Johnson Drive, Foxridge, Knoll, Row. We've got a lot of outlying cities, so everybody kind of just works together to make sure those roads are cleaned up. If you're coming back the other way, you might as well push the other city streets, so it's getting cleaned up. So everybody works well with that, together on that. We got a truck on the north and south side of town. The thoroughfares get cleaned up way quicker than the residential stuff. So once that's looking good, the bigger trucks break off into the residential areas where they can fit, and we can clean that up and start trying to get the city cleaned up. Once the streets are open, we kind of move on to sidewalks, parking lots, trails, and those things. That's kind of our last thing to get cleaned up once the snow stops. The only caveat to that is City Hall. We try to make sure everybody has access to this in the mornings. So we might get here at 4 a.m, just make sure we don't have any slip and falls or anything like that. And then school zones, they're a priority if school's in session. If school's canceled, they just fall to the back burner when we do trails and sidewalks. And that's kind of long and short of it. We've got a great group of guys, do a great job. The only time we really see complaints across the board is if you get 10 inches of snow, you just can't clean it up fast enough, and people don't always get that. And then Johnson Drive and the on-street parking, we always do those on night shifts. Just that's when there's no cars and we can get it cleaned up right. That's kind of the short of the snow plowing. Be happy to answer any questions on the snow plan for the next coming years.
Yeah. Ben, did you have any?
Yeah, to say you guys do a great job is underselling it, so we appreciate that. Do you say residential streets get done a little slower? I've never seen slow is not a word I would use to describe it, so we appreciate that work. The only outstanding question I had is how much hurting do we take on road maintenance from salt, and is that state of the art progressing any? Is that something that hurts the concrete and hurts the asphalt, or is it relatively durable to it?
Hurts everything.
Yeah.
There's not a good solution. I mean, salt's,
Yeah.
I mean, as the road degrades, the salt's worse on it. I mean, we try to crack seal, but once that brine or mixture starts getting underneath the pavement, and it's terrible for concrete. So we won't even use rock salt on sidewalks or trails. It's all ice melt. Sometimes we'll use some brine on some steps, just trip and falls. But rock salt's terrible for concrete. So, I mean, it's better for asphalt. But there's really not a good solution. I mean, you can see the highways after winter, all that concrete starts popping wherever that salt can get underneath it, freezing and thawing. So I don't know if there's ever going to be a great solution for ice and snow control to remove it quickly.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Any other ones? All right, I did that.
Yeah, I got one last plug.
Oh,
The
yeah.
guys really love the nice equipment we have. So they do appreciate it. They talk about it. They talk how proud they are when they go to other city events or training opportunities of how nice our stuff is. So they really do appreciate it, and so do I. So thank you. We'll see you next time.
All right. That concludes, oh,
He's gonna give his department.
oh, okay, yeah, please, go for it. Yep, department update.
The biggest one that everybody's talking about, Water One's main project going from Johnson Drive basically from Johnson Drive on Outlook to 53rd Street. That main is up and operational. They are going to start restoration on the road, yards, curb, sidewalk, all that starting on Monday. Superior Bowen's their subcontractor doing that work. We've got everything marked out all the way up to 55th. They still had a little bit of work from 55th to 53rd. I'm meeting with them probably early next week to kind of get that figured out of where they're patching locations and how that's all going to look. But Superior Bowen will probably move through there pretty quick, big operation. And they do good work, so it should start coming together pretty soon. And And then 55th and Row are both in good shape and looking good. So our 2024 projects are coming to a close relatively quickly, and Johnson Drive Native Landscaping is about buttoned up. So we're going to start that 6-month maintenance period probably next week and a half after they just do a little fine tuning after walk through today. Happy to answer any questions.
Lately, yeah.
As a resident of Outlook Street between 53rd and 55th, I want to thank you all for having the two different contractors coordinate when both 55th and Outlook was closed, and there were 16 houses that weren't going to be able to leave on a morning before work. So thank you for that. And I have to say, I know that Water One is Water One and streets are maybe not their main thing, but was pretty rough and weird and piles of asphalt in place. You know, I couldn't drive into my driveway because of the line going into my driveway. My car doesn't have very good clearance. So it's, you know, not that big of it. And my driveway is weird anyway, but there's just, the coordination wasn't very good. They would drive down the street super slow, like they were like inspecting, fine, but geez, I could walk faster and I'm trying to get home. Yeah. So anyways, it's been a little painful is my point. And so I'm super glad to see that coming to an end.
And just, I'm not plugging Water One,
Yeah.
but just that project, you know, we would have never done that had them do that with us reconstructing 55th Street. So once that main blew 3 times over on Outlook on the other side of Johnson Drive, that was slated for 5 years down the road from this year. And they've drastically fast tracked it because that main was in such bad shape. So it probably didn't get coordinated to the level it needed to fast track, because they have a short construction window, because once it gets cold, they can't have that water turned off. And it was an old, I think it's a 30-inch main, but had 200 services on it that they don't even do anymore. So that's the temporary water line. So it was, I wouldn't say the one-off, but it was definitely fast tracked to avoid future blowups.
Replace the main too.
Well, they slip line some of it, and it's, I mean, they used every method possible. I'd say now it's open cut, it's slip lining, it's whatever kind of works for their scenario of what they're doing and what's cost effective, like everybody else. So.
And it wasn't necessarily the water line. It was just, I know that they had to use a lot of big steel plates and they would try to kind of make it so that the road wasn't quite so uneven. But whoever was laying down the asphalt around the plates.
It's an ongoing battle. I will give you that.
I don't know how much they were paying these people, but I think like a 3-year-old could have done a better job of not just dumping asphalt in weird lumpy areas. And it made no sense as a bystander. But I do appreciate a new water line, and the people doing that actual work, I think we're doing a great job. It was just.
I will pass it along.
Thank you.
Those words exactly.
And I wanted to pass along kudos to Brent and to Stephanie. With this restoration, Water One will be replacing some sidewalks, and Brent in particular had the foresight to engage in the conversation to say there are other sidewalk panels that need to be repaired. They don't meet ADA standards. And so we're going to be able at a very cost-effective price. And we set aside money for sidewalk repairs every year in our CIP, but to take advantage of piggybacking on that contract, because at the end of the day, people are going to think it's us in there anyway. And so if there's a bad sidewalk in front of their house and their neighbors gets replaced and theirs doesn't, they're not going to remember that it was Water One's responsibility. So I really appreciate that opportunity that all of our staff has to kind of look at how can we stretch whatever dollars we have further. So we're going to be able to get better sidewalks through that stretch at a more cost-effective rate. So thank you for that.
Appreciate it.
Mhm.
Yeah, Debbie.
Can I find out, my Dan's on his phone, where we are on 55th Street?
Yeah, so we pulled cones today from the manhole adjustments that had a 7-day cure time. They've got some retaining walls they just got buttoned up. We'll finish the sidewalk ADA ramps next week. There's just a few in tie-in points, and then it's just sod and restoration, and that project will be buttoned up. So we pulled 80% of the traffic control today. There's still some stuff around the equipment and the backfill dirt for the retaining walls for the sidewalk for backfill, but I would say in the next 3 weeks, that's project's pretty well buttoned up. 100%.
It's looking good today.
But
It's looking good today.
your ride's good. Sidewalk's ADA compliant, which hadn't been that way for a long time. Thank you.
I think Robin has some updates.
Okay, and bringing us back to winter, after the snow plan. So I have, lots of fun things coming up for us before the end of the year. Holiday Lights and Festive Sights is Friday, December 6th, but beginning at 5:30, across the street from the Mission Market site or at the Mission Market site at Johnson Drive and Reed's. We are super excited to bring a holiday pop-up market to the site. So we'll have maybe an elevated, street closure to accommodate that. Our Parks and Rec folks will have fun games, hot chocolate, s'mores. The mayor will light her tree, and we will have some good musical performances from our friends at some local choirs and some other musical groups that our Parks and Rec folks have been arranging. So I would encourage you all to mark that on your calendars, and really looking forward to sort of a new chapter of this event and maybe adding some more elements to it every year. Then we're also bringing back our downtown window decorating contest. You may remember Emily pioneered that last year, and we had such a good time with it. So that will be coming to you. We've asked everyone to have windows ready to go live on Saturday, November 30th. That's the Saturday after Thanksgiving, Small Business Saturday. So we can really work to highlight our local small businesses and also bring folks in to look at the windows. The same format will be followed this year as last year. So we'll have judges that will get together and review all of the windows on a rubric that we make, and that will allow them to determine first, second, and third place. We'll also have fan favorite voting available with a QR code in the window of all of our participating businesses. So we've been working to get all that stuff set up this week, and along with Holiday Lights. So our Holiday Lights flyers are all ready, and they'll go out to our businesses on Friday. So start seeing those in windows. And then the last thing I have for you is a mini business update at a committee meeting, which is that our friends at Tyler's house are getting ready to cut the ribbon on their new location. So they have moved to 6200 Johnson Drive, which was something I didn't know, but there is office space below the Go Pet Go location there, and that's where they are. So next Wednesday, November 13th, beginning at 4 o'clock. I'm happy to answer any questions. They are. Well, I'll do a full business update for you in 2 weeks, but we wanted to make sure to get that Tyler's house, but that is correct. So Mud Pie Vegan Bakery will be moving into Mission, where Nothing Bunk Cakes was on the west end of Johnson Drive. Hopefully before the end of the year. They didn't have an exact date, but they are moving quickly. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Can I ask just one quick question about, who would know anything about the structure at it's like 3 stories tall?
Probably Brian would be your best bet for that one.
We had renderings of that. I think I remember. Yeah.
It's in the form-based
Well,
code district, so there are certain height requirements that go along with the building.
What was your question?
Question is, I understand what the form-based code equates to, but the potential for looking like 3 stories, is it gonna be storage on the top or what, or will it just be?
No, it's essentially going to be a faux second floor. So it's a 1-story building and with very tall walls. And basically the parapet wall that goes around the top of the building that usually hides the mechanical equipment and so forth is essentially the 2nd story. So those are kind of fake windows, awnings and all of that. So it gives the appearance of kind of a 2nd story building. And that's the form-based code. That's one of the oddities of the form-based code. It allows for a 1-story building on a lot that's a half acre or less, which is that lot. That lot's just a fraction under half acre. But then the height of the building has to be, I don't know the exact height, but it has to essentially be the height of the 2-story building. And so, okay, you can have a 1-story building, but still look like a 2-story building. We saw that with Chick-fil-A. It's a very tall, slender building. That's the same application. Yeah, so there's a brick wall that goes around that with the intention of kind of hiding the parking lot. We had some discussions with the police chief about the fact that maybe it hides a little too much. But there are openings in the brick wall. So there'll be sections of the wall that are, 6 feet tall, sections are 4 feet and 6 feet. And those sections that are 6 feet tall will actually have openings, like little windows in the wall. So it can allow somebody to look in and see what's going on or vice versa. So.
I have a question about the form-based code. And I've had this ever since I started on council. How sustainable is it to make a building look like it's 2 stories when it's really only one functional story? Is that always to hide the air conditioning equipment, or is that just to make it look a certain way? That just
Well,
doesn't, it seems like waste of money.
Yeah, well, the developer would tell you it's a waste of money. Yeah. But we always want to hide the air conditioning and the HVAC equipment on the roofs. We always have screening. That's a requirement of any development.
Okay.
But then it's to create that sense of density. That West form-based code is really designed to create a sense of density on the west side of town, to create more of a sense of kind of an urban walkable area. And so we seek to have buildings that are built to the sidewalk, that are tall. We like to have taller buildings. There's really no height limit, but we encourage taller buildings with retail, the ground floor, office or residential above. But that becomes a cost for the developers. So they don't really want to go much above 4 or 5 stories like we saw with Mr. Mesmer's project earlier this evening. But again, we're talking about this evening with the code update, would be kind of looking at those things and are there opportunities to tweak some of that?
I would appreciate that because I have often wondered why some of those newer buildings look like 2 stories and
Yeah.
the top story is really not
Mm-hmm.
benefiting anyone. And if it's just to make it look a certain way, that doesn't
Yeah.
seem like a wise.
Yeah, that's one of those
sustainable-
ones I'll guarantee you will be a touch point in the zoning code update.
That's pretty high
Particularly
on the list.
related to, so I think there are several things in the West Gateway, and this gets back to some of that scenario testing. The size of the parcel, and when you look at the type of businesses, so think about all of the chain or corporately owned fast casual or restaurants there who follow a certain standard in terms of their design or development. So the intent really was to say, we want buildings that can be more sustainable in terms of use in the future. So having 2 stories would accomplish that. What we've seen in real life in implementation of that form-based code on those parcels has resulted in just what you're saying, and that is sort of faux second story
Now,
that meet some of that intent, but they don't address the functionality of sort of that underlying premise.
and
in
the
the
struggle too, I said parcels of property that are half acre or less can be 1 story. Well, that means anything that's a half acre or more, it has to be 2 story by code. It's required. And so developers will look at sites like where the swig is going to go or where tidal wave was built. And we'll tell them it has to be 2 story. I can't build that. That's just not feasible, given the size of the site and putting a building in there with an elevator, then the required amount of parking to service that building. That just doesn't work. That's what the code requires. And these are kind of the,
Question poll that we have.
Yeah, I mean, long
pinch points that
story
we
short.
have with staff and working in the code and
Long story
developers.
short, yeah, that's why we need the zoning code fixed.
Yeah.
You'd want there to be an office or a bedroom or apartment above there, but nobody's gonna, wood frame structure with a deep fryer and a drive-through, no one's living above that.
No one wants to live above that.
Okay. I have one more item that we are launching away from businesses and over to communications and social media. So one thing that we talked about with our public works friends was having a name the snowplow contest in Mission. So it's kind of fun, we can all use a little levity sometimes, especially in the winter holiday season. So we're going to launch that on Friday in conjunction with our annual sharing out of the snow plan and just all the public works does for us as far as keeping our roads clear and dry and safe. So our general idea is to offer naming for 2 weeks. And then once we have all of the name submissions, we'll narrow those down and have some voting for a week or so. And fingers crossed, we won't need those snowplows before we're all finished. We hope to have it wrapped up around the beginning of December in conjunction with holiday lights and festive sites. So if you all want to put your thinking caps on or encourage your friends and neighbors to be creative, we're looking forward to launching that for you guys on Friday.
Cool. I like that.
All right, I just have a couple of things. Some of them are fun. So last week we had our pumpkin carving, pumpkin decorating contest. This was Brian's entry, the Dead Tree Patrol, which did get several votes for the spookiest pumpkin. And then this was our mechanic, Josh Ryan's snowplow. And what you can't really tell from this is actually there was real salt in the bed and it didn't go up and down, but it lit up. He had the whole thing electrified. So these folks take it to the next level in their job. And that was always really fun. We had about so probably close to 40 employees across all of our departments that got together for lunch and just kind of enjoyed that. So just a couple of quick things. I know it's been a long night tonight, but thank you again for taking the time to have the special meeting last week to approve the benefit package. We've got the final touches on the open enrollment guide, and that will be going out, we believe, in the morning to employees, and we'll kind of start that open enrollment process. Just a reminder that we are scheduled to have a work session ahead of our city council meeting on November 20th. It will be at 6 p.m. We're going to be talking about some of the work that Penn and Brian Lorette, our business manager, and staff at the community center have done about looking at fee and rate increases in the membership structures. Then we will have our city council meeting. Also a reminder that in December, our committee meetings are on the second Wednesday, so December 11th, because of your holiday event. At the November 20th meeting, a reminder again that we'll be looking to take nominations and elect a new council president and or vice president. And then we're in the process of looking at reappointments for our board and commission members whose terms expire at the end of this year. The last couple of years, we have invited people in and actually done in-person interviews, which is very time consuming, but it was a great exercise. But this year we actually distributed a survey to those. We've got great survey results. I'm trying to get those compiled in a spreadsheet to share with the mayor, but then we'll share them back with all of you and the council liaisons, because I think there's some good feedback in terms of what they see as working well, or areas where they would like to see some enhancements or improvements. And I think that is all I have this evening.
Is the Mohawk ribbon cutting still next Thursday?
No, I'm sorry. Yes, the
Okay.
Mohawk ribbon cutting is not next Thursday. I believe, I forgot to ask the mayor this morning, but I think we're looking at the 21st,
Okay.
which is the following. What?
It's open 3:20.
Oh, well, you're still welcome to,
Okay.
you know, you were part of the decision making. That
Didn't
made that
especially
happen.
disinvite
The-
you, Trent.
The rain last weekend and things we're in a race against the weather right now to get that playground done. And we just thought it was going to be too close for the 14th. So more information to come on that, but we have pushed it off of next week.
Okay. Thank you. All right. With nothing else, it is now 8:50 p.m. and with no further discussion, that concludes the meeting of the Community Development Committee. Again, this video will be made public on our website at missionks.org. Thank you.